It's the Ollie Mammon Show. Welcome to the ABC of CBD. Russ isn't here because I think the internet's cut off, so I'm just going to start on with the show. It's been incredible. We're on week 32. It's amazing. I still can't believe Men's Radio Station has not kicked me off yet. I cannot believe I'm still here and they're still letting me do this for you. But to be honest with you, I'm really enjoying every single week, really enjoying educating you, really enjoying sharing with you and introducing my guests and them sharing their stories with you guys. Hopefully we're educating you guys and, hopefully we're guiding you on your journey through the cannabis world. Our guest today is a gentleman by the name of Phil Monk. Okay. Russ has just arrived. First time I've seen.
I haven't just arrived. I hate this. This laptop is driving me insane. I can only apologize, everybody. I am so sorry.
We're starting a Kickstarter fund to buy Russ better internet and a new laptop.
Do you know, I even complained to the CEO of British Telecom, BT, and I got his PA to reply to me, and they said, there's nothing we can do. I'm in the middle of London, the greatest city in the world, and this is the internet. And also, I am so sorry. Ollie, hello, good afternoon to you.
Hey, buddy.
Good early. Hello, Ollie.
Episode 32, man. Thursday night.
Unbelievable. Welcome, everybody, to Men's Radio Station, episode 32 of the ABC of CBD with the great, the count of cannabinoids, the hunk of hemp, Mr.
The
Ollie
Mr.
Mammon.
of marijuana.
No. See, I'd never use that word. You see, I never do that. I've
Fine, it's worth a try.
32 weeks. I've avoided the whole thing. Hello to Veronica Curran. Left on your own devices. Ha, ha, ha. No, we were actually chatting. Then the line just died on me. Phew, just in time. I know. JIT, just in time. You can hear us on Men's Radio Station, which is www.mensradiostation.com. We're out on Twitter. Of course, we're on Facebook. And also you can get us on our own YouTube channel, which is just look up Men's Radio Station, find us on YouTube. This has been such an amazing educational journey. I hate the word journey, so I expect Simon Cowell to turn up and somebody about to give it 110% for their grandmother who just died. But it's been an amazing education. I have loved every single one of Ollie's guests. It's extraordinary. So I'm just a passenger here. I'm going to shushy straight over to our host, Mr. Ollie Mammon.
So before I do my second introduction, and before I bring on the guests, I think we might as well just get the advert out of the way and then we can carry on with the show. Let's just do that. Roll it, scene. I'm sure you've heard before that good quality CBD needs to be really, really expensive. This is the new view of CBD, a product created by users for users, a product at an affordable price, available everywhere at any time at the simple click of a button. Just CBD and MCT oil. No additives, no preservatives, and no flavor enhancers. It's a simple subscription-based service. The cleanest possible CBD delivered to your door for the lowest possible price. Your product, your rights for the lowest possible price.
I was having a little dance there. If Sinner was watching, he'd be going like, what the hell?
Cena can see everything, all right? So, and sometimes he can hear everything.
Cena is like God.
Yeah, so basically,
but we never
doesn't
see
respond.
Him. We have to believe that Sinner is there and not in our imaginations.
Exactly. He's like the Ollie, voice who's not the voice in our head.
Guy. Off you go.
Fine. So last week we were joined by Guy Coxall from Seed Our Future. We discussed the politically focused aims of the reports which they produce and the unjust treatment of cannabis users and the issues surrounding cannabis itself in the UK over the last 130 years. We dissected his report, discussed some of the more pressing issues and had an open discussion around the changing view and discourse surrounding cannabis over the last 130 years. Cannabis has not always been criminal and illegal. It's been used in many different cultures and societies throughout history across the world, religiously, medically, socially. It's only in the last 70 years or so that the leash around the neck of cannabis has been tightened and medical cannabis users have had no access to products. In the 1970s in the UK, you could get cannabis on prescription and then it just stopped. It was never illegal. It just kind of just stopped being available. We discussed the concept of criminality that's created around cannabis users, the idea of the gateway drug, of how cannabis is a gateway drug, and how the system actually creates more criminals than it finds. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more today with Phil. This week, we're joined by another man looking at a more fair and just treatment of cannabis users in the UK. He goes by the name of Phil Monk, and he heads up an organization called WTU, We the Undersigned. Also politically focused for change through education, Phil is not a cannabis activist. He's a human rights campaigner, and he has worked closely with Guy Coxall curating these reports, which we've dived into over the last few weeks. Phil has suffered for many years with I wrote this down because it's very hard. So Phil has suffered for many years with an issue called myofascial pain from joint hypermobility spectrum disorder. He has been a medical cannabis user for some time. He fights for people's rights to care for themselves, medicate themselves, and people who choose to stay away from conventional medicine. Phil has been through the conventional medical system. He's tried it. He's been there, and it's failed him. He's been left wanting and needing something that actually works, like so many other users out there who go through this conventional medical system and they still come out the other side needing and wanting something which actually helps them. Phil is one of those people who believes that modern medicine does more harm than good. I'm also actually one of those people. I really do believe that modern medicine, unfortunately, does more harm than good. But Phil chooses to speak up about this, hoping to make a change, hoping to influence the UK government to be better and kinder to its ever hopeful population. Phil is well educated. He's a well-respected man in our industry and in our community, and he uses words and wisdom to help others and to guide others. He's basically that dude who helps people understand their human rights in this space. And he's basically that guy who helps people understand the journey they have to go through this law-riddled, convoluted marketplace that surrounds us all. On one side, you're a medical cannabis user. On the other side, you're a criminal. And fact of the matter is, there's got to be a bit of a middle ground. And Phil helps people find that middle ground and helps them to understand what their actual rights are in this world. Right to live happily, right to live without pain. And he helps people understand the fact that they're not criminals, and he helps people, to almost fight their battles. I've actually been looking forward to having this guest on for a very, very long time. I've known him for a few years now. We met on the expo, on the expo circuit, as you call it. And it's actually a double episode. So he's on this week, and he's also on next week with Robert Jappy, the lawyer who we had on, I think, 25 weeks ago now, which seems 25 weeks.
Do we leave it on a cliffhanger? Ollie, do we leave it on a cliffhanger?
With Robert?
No. And then it comes up to be continued.
Can we do that? Cena, can you do a to be continued at the end?
That would be just brilliant. And
that would be incredible.
It would be like, a two-part
production value, proper production value.
Two-parter of Law and Order UK.
We should end with me and Phil and you trying to disarm a bomb. That's what we should do. And then what we do, and then we move on from us trying to disarm the bomb, tune in next week to see if we save England. Do you know what I mean? It'll be incredible. No, there's no bomb. There's no bomb. Okay? It's not happening. Oh. I shouldn't have said that. You can't say bomb on the radio, can you?
Well, you just did.
Like 5 times. Yeah, so anyway, let's bring on our guest. I want to say something. Phil is quite opinionated, but his opinions are based on his journey. So as someone who's lived with pain for years, who had little to gain from the medical system as we know it, who's tried most conventional methods of dealing with his problem, he's very opinionated about the system, which is completely fair because he's been through it and fought through it. So if we can bring on our guest, because I feel like we've already taken up loads of the show. What's up, Phil?
Good evening, gents. Thank you very much for that most entertaining introduction.
It's not bad, is it?
That was Phil. That was the entire show. There's no time for you now. That was just the. That was it.
That did occur to me.
Phil, I've got to ask you before I let Ollie loose on you. Are you familiar with the American band Dream Theater?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay. Look up the keyboard player who's the founding member of Dream Theater. You'll see what I'm saying. That's all I'm going to say.
What is it, his doppelganger?
Got to be a likeness there.
I'm thinking
uncanny, right?
Yes, I got really excited there for a second. It was that. All right, it was that.
Sorry to disappoint you. It's just me.
No. You're not disappointing at all. It was just. All right. I'm sorry, Ollie. I'm in the.
Don't say sorry.
I
nice.
do apologise.
It's always nice when people get starstruck and they realise it's not actually a star who they've been struck by. It's actually a little bit, it's quite cute. Do you know what I mean? I did that recently. I was walking, I was like, is it? And I went up to her, I go, are you? And he was like, no. And I was like, all right. And I just walked away, which is actually quite nice in today's world. I haven't spoken to a stranger.
Although what the hell Henry VIII was doing in Bushy, we'll never know. Anyway, there we are. Okay.
So
thank you for having us on the show.
It's our absolute pleasure. So before we get started, I just wanted you to kind of, I know we're going to go into this a bit more next week, so I only want like a little bit of detail. What is WTU? Because I just want all of our members, before we get to know you and before we dive into you, and I know we're not actually going to talk about this today because we're going to talk about it next week. What is WTU? What does it stand for? What are you aiming to do, etc., etc., etc.?
Okay, it'd be quite strange actually, because I'm not used to talking about me. I often talk about the campaign and the law and human rights and cannabis and government corruption and hypocrisy. I don't often talk about me. So forgive me if it feels a bit uncomfortable and awkward. Yeah, me. WTU actually is the abbreviated name of We the Undersigned Have a Human Sovereign Right to Cannabis. That's our full title. We the Undersigned Have a Human Sovereign Right to Cannabis. We actually changed it to cannabosm, the ancient Hebrew term for cannabis, because of Facebook censorship. So we are on Facebook as cannabosm, spelled with a Kanehbosm. We are called WTU for short, thankfully, or We the Undersigned. When I made the group, you see, I never set out to be an activist or a campaigner or anything like that. It's been an accidental. I call it my canna journey, as it happens, Russ. Not one of journeys, but it's my canna journey, yeah. And it began when I was 16 years old, for myself, personally speaking. But WTU is, I suppose, it's come about from my anger and frustration at the government corruption, hypocrisy, and inhumanity against the British population with regards to cannabis prohibition laws. I've got to try, and really difficult to keep it on track. I wanted to find, because I believe my right to access cannabis is a fundamental human right. My freedom of consciousness, for one, in fact, first and foremost, is my freedom of consciousness. This is my mind, and I am entitled and have the right to explore it as I determine and see fit. No government authority elected to serve the public has a right to dictate those choices to me until such time as I'm causing harm to another human being. That is human rights legislation, which supersedes national legislation. We've got two-tier legislation in the UK. It used to just be one tier. They looked at the national legislation. It was a yes or no. Now they have to check if it infringes human rights. And they've determined that cannabis doesn't infringe our human rights because it's a Schedule 1 harmful drug that warrants Class B sentencing. And it is upon that basis that they deny our human rights to a private life.
Can I just drop a little bomb right now? Okay, yeah. I just want to drop a bomb. Go back 30 years, it was illegal and a criminal act to be homosexual, and people were killed and battered and completely. I'm not saying that. Listen, no, I'm not comparing the two, but what I am saying is, you go back 30 years in time. All right, go back 20 years in time. Being homosexual was illegal, and it was, you know, like the 20 years. Sorry, like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Sorry, but I mean, like if you go back in history, it was illegal to be homosexual.
Yeah.
And
so what is your point, Ollie? Then
my point is there's a change in discourse which happens. Now, I understand this logic of if no harm is being done onto another person, why shouldn't you be able to, you know, live your free way? Now, most cannabis users are not using cannabis because they want. Medicinal cannabis users are not using cannabis because they want to. They're using cannabis because they have to. And if they had the choice to click their fingers and be normal in the eyes of society and not have to use cannabis, I bet you £1 million every single one of us would click our fingers and be normal in the eyes of society.
Apart from myself, cannabis is my way of life. It is my way of being. It has been since I was 16 years old. It will be to the day I die. It isn't just about using it for my specific symptoms. It has become that in my journey, but cannabis has always been, for me, I prefer it instead of alcohol, first and foremost. So when I began teaching, they wanted me to drink alcohol and all the rest of it, like everyone else does in society. Made me sick as a dog, and I thought I prefer cannabis, so I choose it instead of alcohol. And the WTU fight not for this illusionary medical cannabis, which I dispute doesn't exist, but the use of cannabis for medical purposes. So we want to kind of, well, change the paradigm completely. You mentioned the homosexuality, which is very interesting, actually, because if you look in Black's Law Dictionary, homosexuality and drug use, possession, etc., are the only victimless crimes. So drug use, possession, cultivation, etc., is the last victimless crime that we need to remove from the statute books, same as homosexuality.
I'm confused by something you said, Phil, and
yes.
You haven't. I don't know if you've watched the show or not, but in the past, but I always act as everyman here.
Yes.
So you just said you dispute that there's medicinal cannabis.
No, the actual, well, yes, because everyone says medicinal cannabis and recreational cannabis. So we'll be familiar with the fact that people talk about accessing medical cannabis and that recreational cannabis is illegal. But they're one and the same thing, and that's what very few people seem to realize. The only difference is one is cultivated under license and the rest isn't. The cannabis that's cultivated in my cupboard behind the camera that you can't see, I haven't got a license to do that, but it's still medicinal to me. But I'm cultivating recreational varieties that the pharmaceutical companies cultivate and then sell as a medical product. So you have things like Jack Herer, Moby Dick, Green Crack.
1 second, Phil.
Bruce Banner. Hold on, these are recreational strains or varieties of cannabis that when they're cultivated by a pharmaceutical company, they then get the name change and they're sold as medical cannabis. But people are able to cultivate that organically at home just as well as a pharmaceutical company. But it's called recreational cannabis because you're growing it at home.
Well,
so this is why
everything we've done for 32 weeks.
No.
Well, maybe this is why.
No, not at all, Russ. If you listen to what we've discussed over the last few weeks.
If you listen very carefully, cannabis is cannabis. The only difference is the intent of the consumer and the licensee status of the cultivator, and also at the end of in the pharmaceutical process, because they are concerned about the standardization. It goes through a final standardization, homogenization process that someone's homegrown organic won't go through. What I'm saying is recreational cannabis and medical cannabis, they're the same thing. It's all the same thing.
And Russ, if you go back to some of our earlier episodes, it's exactly what we discussed. We talked about the fact that there is no difference between hemp and cannabis. They're all the same plant. It all comes down to the same argument.
I get all that. I've been here for 32 weeks. I know that.
Hold on. Let me finish. So what happens is you have this argument that as soon as something gets the stamp of approval, it's almost like kosher meat. Okay, it's killed in a certain way, so it's kosher. It gets that stamp of approval. Now, if you kill the meat in the same way that kosher meat is killed, but doesn't get the stamp of approval, it's not kosher meat, even if it goes through exactly the same process. And it's the same thing. It's like the government stamp of approval makes something medical.
Yes.
But this is why there are so many, this is why we talk about 1.8 million medical cannabis users and 5,000 who are legal and 1.795 million who are illegal. And that's what we talk about, because you've got this idea that cannabis is one, it's a singular. Okay, it's a singular family of thousands of plants, but as soon as you take that group, it is just one. And what Phil's trying to say is there is a label which is applied to cannabis, which is grown and harvested by companies who have the money to make it an active pharmaceutical ingredient. That label makes it medicinal cannabis, but the differences between the actual end product are non-existent. And that's one thing which I have talked about over the last 32 weeks.
I wouldn't ever say, like you just said, the UK has got 1.6 users of medical cannabis. I would say that isn't accurately expressed. Forgive me, I'm a language teacher, so semantics are everything. To express that accurately 100% is we have 1.6 million people who consume cannabis for medical purposes. Because the cannabis that those 1.6 million people are consuming isn't from a pharmaceutical company. That is from what people wrongly call, and I won't use the term other than this now phrase, the racist term black market. it shouldn't be called a black market. It should be called an unlicensed and uncontrolled market, because that's actually what it is. So at the minute, we have 1.6 million people who consume cannabis for medical purposes, who obtain it from illicit sources that aren't licensed to cultivate and distribute, because we can't access it through the NHS, and the vast majority can't access it through the private sector at the moment, where it is available in its licensed standardized forms. Which is why when we skunk is a prime example. You know, we will have skunk being talked about as a dangerous recreational variety of cannabis, but it's also the same strength THC cannabis is sold on prescription, which the police would call skunk. So skunk is actually available on prescription for medical purposes. In other words, there is no medical cannabis. There's just cannabis, and you have consumers who consume for a specific medical purpose, or consumers who consume for alternative adult purposes, such as enhancing spirituality, creativity, or just generally relaxing and trying to take away the stresses of life, which I believe is the prophylactic medical use of cannabis.
Okay.
Which is why I believe we should be able to choose cannabis instead of alcohol. Because currently in this country, if you want to relax or mourn or celebrate anything about life, by law, you're only allowed to use alcohol to alter your state of mind or explore your consciousness. Alcohol is 114 times more toxic to the human body than cannabis, and is a poison. So government are literally dictating the recreational poison over cannabis, which is why I believe people should have the right to choose cannabis instead of alcohol as a prophylactic medical choice, because they relieve stress and that improves their health outcomes. Whereas people who use alcohol to relieve stress are actually worsening their health outcomes, which is why the WTU campaign, not just for the right to use it for medical purposes, but for adult purposes too, in replacement of pharmaceutical drugs and the recreational drug alcohol.
Now, Phil, your story kind of gives a little bit more, call it, validity to your opinions, okay, and validity to the way you feel. So I want to dive a little bit into your story, because if people understand what you've actually been through, maybe they'll understand where you're coming from, because in this world we can only ever empathize with those we understand, and I want people to understand, therefore they can empathize, and therefore they'll know where you're coming from and why you're coming from that angle. So let's talk about your journey as a patient. Let's talk about your issues. Let's talk about the myofascial,
chronic myofascial pain from joint hypermobility spectrum disorder is its title.
And then also you, as we spoke about earlier, the PTSD and the depression.
Yeah, well, my full range of ailments, if you will, chronic myofascial pain from joint hypermobility spectrum disorder, which is a connective tissue disease similar to Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I have faulty collagen, and my soft tissues just break randomly. My toes, ankles, hips dislocate as I'm walking. My fingers, knuckles, wrist, shoulders do the same. And that's for no reason, not for any exertion. You just slip out of place and then you put back in. And it is extremely painful, muscle tears galore. I also have arthritis through my feet and ankles from when I used to run up and down mountains for fun as a cross-country runner. I used to do cross-country mountain biking. I was extremely sporty and fit. And PTSD is from childhood experiences that shouldn't have occurred, and depression, which is kind of comorbid with the loss of my life through disability, and also the PTSD from what occurred during my childhood.
How long you suffered for?
A few questions here, Phil. When did your variety of ailments start?
The PTSD I've had since I was about 10 years old, no, maybe 12 years old. That stems from, began with physical and mental abuse from my stepfather, that then stemmed into sexual abuse when I was 14 onwards. Not that he actually touched me sexually, but he got me to perform acts in front of him, which constitutes sexual abuse, although he may dispute that fact himself. And that's actually led to me losing all of my family. But that was the beginning of my...
I do have to say, I'm sorry, I do have to say on behalf of Men's Radio Station, and this is for legality, and we have spent a lot of time and effort creating this platform. Obviously, your stepfather is not here to to argue that or to put his side of the case. So I just want to make that clear on behalf of
In that case, I shall avoid mentioning anyone's identities and just refer to events in that case.
Yes, please.
So yeah, sure. Apologies, gentlemen, forgive me. So because of that, that led to me being suicidal and I lived in North Wales. I forgot to mention. So I'm an Englishman who was moved to North Wales at 8 years old. My mum took me away from my father with my stepdad into Wales, where he was from, and it was there that I received physical, mental, racial, and sexual abuse. And that's why I'm very much against racism, because I was racially abused for years there. And that has kind of formed me to be suicidally depressed my entire life. But I do not believe in suicide, so suicide is never an option. Now I have children, that's definitely not an option, but it doesn't take the fact that my brain has lived in that dark space my entire life. I've just learned how to cope with it. So that started when I was about, prepubescent. The physical manifestations of my pains first began when I was about 16 with wrist pains. I have bilateral ulnar impaction syndrome. I forgot that one, sorry. I've had both of my arms shortened. I'm not sure if you can see the scars in my forearms there.
Yep, yes, we can.
So I've had to have my ulnars shortened because too much mountain biking made my ulnar grow 4 millimeters too long in relation to my radius. So after 10 years of debilitating wrist pain, I begged my surgeon to fuse my wrist bones together, because I got to the stage I couldn't hold a pen, I couldn't lift a cup of tea, I couldn't chop up my food, I couldn't do anything for myself. And that was why I trained as a teacher, actually. So I asked the surgeon to fuse my bones like that so I could still fly fish. He refused and said he'd shorten my bones instead. And that was 4 years of surgery. And then I had an injury. Go on.
Just quickly. So during these surgeries and during these procedures you were going through,
come out, mate.
Were you like I assume they gave you medications and stuff like that?
Well, that's that's all led to where I am today.
So talk about the medications they gave you as a kid.
Well, I didn't have any medications as a kid, as it happens. I had no help at all as a child. I left home at 16, 2 days after leaving school. A friend peer pressured me to use cannabis for the first time, recreationally, as it were. I was 16 and I was anti-drugs. I was a fitness fanatic and I'd been conditioned by school to be anti-drugs. And a friend really wanted me to try hash. He knew I could get hash through my brother. So eventually I just did it just to shut him up, because after a week of this fella nagging me, I thought, God. Anyway, went and got some hash and we smoked this hash and I stopped feeling suicidal. And it turned the voices down in my head. And that was at that point, actually, when I became a user of cannabis for medical purposes, but I did not know it at the time. And I then spent, until I started campaigning in 2014, thinking of myself as nothing but a dirty, naughty stoner. And that was how I believed myself and kept it very secret and clandestine. Became a teacher and obviously didn't tell anyone, because you lose your career as a teacher for using cannabis. But I started, that was my medicine from 16.
So we meet a lot of these, a lot of us, a lot of patients who are like secret patients, like secret stoners, quiet medicators, people who basically, they're almost embarrassed. I'm less of that now, but I mean, almost embarrassed of the fact that they medicate using cannabis because of the social stigma which is attached to it. Actually, I have several in my company who I work with who are secret stoners, as in like they will not mention it, but they are avid cannabis users for medicinal purposes, but they won't talk about it because they feel embarrassed. They feel like they get judged socially. Even like in their previous industries, they felt like they were judged for, how they treated themselves, and everyone makes the same comment. Why don't you just go to the doctor and get yourself some pills? Like it's a standard. If you're in pain, go to the doctor and get yourself some pills. And it's just
what happened when you went?
When I went to the doctors for the pills, well, that was as an adult, actually. I didn't use the doctors throughout much of my life. I went and they put me on the paracetamol, ibuprofen. Then it came to cocodamol. Then I went back saying I've got stomach pains and it wasn't managing my pain. Then so they put me on even stronger painkillers. Then gave me some omeprazole, I think it was called omeprazole. I'm not sure how they pronounce it.
Yes.
Yeah, which is apparently to protect your stomach lining, but actually the side effects of that is debilitating joint conditions and problems like that. So then I was on amitriptyline. I had beta blockers first, which put me in hospital with the brain hemorrhage scare within 24 hours of starting them. And then I was on citalopram for depression. They gave me a mini stroke scare that put me in hospital. Then I was on tramadol, which put me in hospital with over 40 different intolerable side effects.
Hang on, let me stop you there. Tramadol, you're supposed. Hang on, Phil. You're supposed to be on tramadol for no more than 3 days.
That wasn't at the time. That's come about more recently, as it happens.
Well, certainly within the last 5 to 10 years, it says very clearly on
2014. I injured myself 2013, and right. I was on tramadol for an extra. I was 18 months before I even got to see a clinician. So they just put me on the drugs and left me at home for 18 months before the hospital even saw me. And that was,
for example, so you were on tramadol, for example, for 18 months.
I wouldn't be able to specify. I'd have to check my actual notes.
Well, a year, I don't know, a year, 6 months?
About 8 months. 9 months? I went up to the maximum dose, 400 milligrams a day of tramadol after my arm surgery in 2014. And it
some of the things. I met this woman recently.
Well, tramadol's a dreadful. Tramadol, which I've been on myself, but after 3 days, you've got to come off it. How the hell you were on it for 8 months? God knows. Oh, yeah, your citalopram, what was your dosage of citalopram then?
I don't remember that, but it was on the actual, I was withdrawing from that. It was on my final reduction when the side effect of my final drop was what actually, which is 100% proportional drop when you withdraw, and I'm not sure if you're aware. So, you know, you can come down 100 milligrams on a medicine and it not affect you if that's only a 10% of your total dose. But you can come off 0.5 milligrams of a drug, and if that's your last drop, that's 100% of your dose, your body can go into shutdown. I've seen that with my brother through his issues, and myself. I was coming off citalopram. I didn't want to be on drugs, and I was withdrawing. I was on my final drop, and I was sent off into a TIA episode. And then the last one was Zomor. I was, a TIA, yes, and I was on Zomor that caused a bladder and bowel cancer scare and a liver cancer scare. And in these hospitalizations, like the first one was the brain hemorrhage scare from beta blockers. And I've got my children sat on the end of my hospital beds. In fact, I would say, you know, are you going to die, Dad? And I'm like, I'm an honest man. I can't tell a lie. I'm going to die with a clear conscience. So I'm saying to my kids, I don't know, kids, actually, I might die, because the doctors have been talking about brain hemorrhages and cancers and all sorts. And it was very traumatizing for the whole family. And I came home and I was finally discharged, and I sat on the end of my sofa. And I looked at my two children, who at this point had no idea I used cannabis. It was very secret in my life. And I looked at my children and I said, look, children, the doctors the drugs the doctors keep giving me nearly kill me repeatedly. And I said, there's this thing that I use that doesn't harm me, but manages my pain. And it's cannabis. And my daughter was appalled, because about a week before, the schools had taught her that cannabis was addictive. You can become addicted the first time you use it. It causes cancer and can kill you, which is actually the antithesis of cannabis, as it happens. So complete and utter misinformation. My son's in the background there nodding, saying he was told the same. So they were told the antithesis of cannabis. And I had to come home and tell my children this. And my daughter looked at me and said, well, Dad, you're going to have to write to the government and tell them they're wrong then, aren't you? And that was literally what precipitated everything that has resulted to where I am today.
How old was your daughter at this point?
That was 2014. She's now 19. What are we in, 2021? She was in, she was in
12 years old.
Yeah. And because my daughter said that, it's what I did. I still have the letters now from where I originally believed government had made a genuine mistake. I truly and utterly believed that they genuinely believed cannabis was a harmful Schedule I drug. Now, when I was told by the surgeon that he was going to chop my bones in half and plate them back together, I knew, because I'd just nursed my now ex-wife through 2 slipped discs and bone fusions. And during her journey, they had taught her that tobacco, nicotine, is a bone toxin. So she had to give up smoking to help her bones heal. So I knew at that time I used tobacco and cannabis. And I knew I had to stop tobacco for my bones to heal. But I didn't know what cannabis did to my body. I'd never looked into it. I just consumed it and it made me feel good. So
you weren't consuming cannabis with the knowledge that cannabis would be good for you. You were
Precisely.
consuming cannabis because every time you smoked it, you felt better and the voice inside your head disappeared, and it was a general sort of, it was your release. And you weren't using it as a medicine, you were using it as a recreational release.
Well, it was just a way of life to me, actually. Since 16, it's factored into my expenses. It's just a daily, it's like a cup of tea or coffee to me. It literally is. It's not a psychedelic drug or anything like that. It's just like tea and coffee. And it has been since I was that age.
Why do you think it is that all the schools, for as long as I can remember, have had visits from, I'm going to use the word experts, or people who have been approved to enter the schools and give lectures and to warn them? Why do you think that is? And that's gone on for decades.
The first one is willful misinformation. The second one, this relates to the very first point I made. Your freedom of consciousness. My absolute belief to the answer to that, Russ, is prohibition is entirely, this is all substances, not just cannabis, is entirely about controlling everyone's states of consciousness and permissible states of consciousness, because these states of consciousness alter your opinions and viewpoints on life. They like the way alcohol makes you think, but not so much these other drugs that make you question the structures of society and systems themselves. So that is why I believe they're prohibited. The people that come into the schools to give these talks that are approved, it's because they're approved. They're just delivering a narrative that they've learned verbatim. Now, if they do the research independently,
some of them, with respect, I don't agree with that, because some of them have been on a journey, like yourself, and they're very open about it. They haven't been picked up because they can repeat by rote something in parrot fashion. They've said, I don't want you, because I've been to these things when my kids were small. And I don't want you to grow up and go through what I did.
Can I say something? Can I say something? So, I went on summer camps when I was a kid, and you just triggered you've triggered a flashback in me. And I went on this summer camp, and they brought in one of these dudes who's like a former crack addict, and they brought him in to basically scare us freaking senseless. And he comes in, and the first thing he says is, 15 years old, smoked my first joint. 16 years old, sniffed my first pint of glue. 18 years old, I was giving. It went mental, as in just went mental. All I'm thinking is I'm 16 years old at the time. I'm thinking, I smoked a joint last year, and I haven't done in the last year and a half. I haven't done any of the crazy shit that you said you've done. And then when I spoke to other people, I was like, look, mate, all right, you smoked a joint before, yeah? He goes, did you do that? And did you go and do that? And were you selling yourself for crack by the end of the month? And he was like, no. And then when I spoke to 30-year-olds, I was like, question, do you smoke weed? And they're like, yeah, I smoke weed. I go, have you ever sold yourself for a bag of cocaine? And they go, what do you mean by sell yourself? Like, have you ever sold yourself sexually for a bag of cocaine? And they're like, no. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go ask a few more people. And I remember all of these talks, they were always so mental. I remember once I went up to this dude and I was like, how do I know you're not lying to me? And he goes, what? I was like, how do I know you're not lying to me? How do I know that you're not an incredible actor who's written an incredible speech to scare me shitless? I said, because fact of the matter is, my dad scares me shitless every night. To be honest with you, the stuff he tells me is like, you shouldn't drink alcohol. Alcohol will do this. You shouldn't do this. It will do this. Like every fear, every little bit of fear mongering which they can create just to terrify us as kids to make sure we don't make their mistakes. But I started questioning. I was like, how do I know that you didn't do crack first? And then after you did crack, you went back to weed and you just started your story at weed. How do I know that, you didn't do this or you didn't do that? And there was no answers, because what happens is it's a rehearsed script. Why? Because it's even me, when I tell my story, I write a script. Why? Because so much has happened in my life. If I want to give a chronological series of events, I need to write a script. Now,
so the guy at your
he probably was a crackhead. He probably was a crackhead, and he probably did smoke weed and then end up doing heroin. But the whole point is most people who smoke weed don't end up doing heroin, because 75% of the population has tried cannabis and 0.01% of the population has tried heroin. The math doesn't add up. We discussed this last week with Guy about how.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I get that.
So I'm saying, like, you have a lot of these people, they will come into schools, and think about what the job is. A job of a teacher. Can let me finish, Phil. The job of a teacher is to teach the students, and the job of the headmaster is to maintain authority in the school. And if they were to bring in one of these speakers who was going to turn around and say, you know what, guys, actually, I smoked weed and I'm absolutely fine, I'm an absolute millionaire, like, it's not going to do much. They won't let me speak in schools. Okay. I approached my old school because I've just, sold my company, and I reached out to them. I was like, I want to come speak. Why? Because I thought that there are hundreds of kids in my year who are like me, that special kid in the class, probably have Tourette syndrome, probably have a problem. They've been told their whole lives they're not going to achieve anything. And to meet someone like me who's pretty awesome would do good for them. And they said, will you mention cannabis? Because we know you do this cannabis radio show. I was like, yes, damn right, I'll mention it. And damn right, I'll mention the fact that I am a great person. The fact that I smoke weed doesn't make me worse. Won't let me in the school.
Well, I'm flattered that your school know that we do the show. There we are.
Yeah.
Okay, Phil. Phil, Ollie's brought you on, so let's focus.
Yeah. I feel it's important just to reiterate that kids shouldn't use drugs. I just quickly say, for the listeners, I don't want to give the impression that. They shouldn't. No, kids shouldn't have literally. They should have no sugar, no tea, no coffee. They should have no drugs. We say that. We have Taneem Montgomery's daughter. We have Taneem Montgomery's daughter who uses cannabis, uses a cannabis extract. But I'm not talking about using things for medical purposes. I was just talking about the recreational use of drugs in children.
Fine.
That's what I was talking about, not as a medicinal thing. But I do believe that it also emphasizes education is what is lacking. Objective, factual education, because like Ollie just said there, he heard the talk and he knew in himself that wasn't his experience. And this is what kids they're hearing, what the government rhetoric is, and then they don't even believe it because they think it's not true. So if they think they're lying about cannabis, what else are they lying about? And that the children, the teenagers on the street, they know the government aren't telling the truth when it comes to cannabis. So the government actually lose all of their respect immediately. But that's not what we're here to talk about. I just think better education and more objective would be good. Like my children shouldn't have been taught that cannabis is addictive, it causes cancer and can kill you, because it is all complete lies. It can be addictive to a tiny minority of people.
And just to be absolutely clear, for transparency, because you're a very articulate and you're a very passionate fellow. I never met you until 6 o'clock this evening. You've never been you've never been tempted or needed to use anything stronger.
What do you mean by strong? I don't quite understand what you mean by that.
Strong. You ever moved on to harder drugs?
You haven't moved on to any other drugs.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting actually, Russ, because for myself now, I've used cannabis for so many years to such an extent, because I've got that pain I'm fighting all the time, that I literally cannot get high anymore. My body will not get high. There is no high response for me anymore from cannabis. It doesn't do that anymore, literally. It just turns my pain down. Now, during my adolescence, whilst I was using cannabis, I also tried alcohol before cannabis. Alcohol was my gateway drug. It is proven to be the gateway drug. Then I went on to cannabis. Then I went on to ecstasy, amphetamine, cocaine, LSD, and I stopped there. Because then I had children and I became a parent, and I stopped doing any recreational stuff, and I focused on, well, to be honest, actually, when you're suicidal and the government tell you take these drugs and you're going to die, well, shit, man, I'm going to take them drugs. And that's what I did. I wanted to die without committing suicide. So I was quite happy to take any drugs I could get my hands on. And I had a fantastic time. And that was when it all fell down. Ecstasy is meant to kill me, but if it wasn't for ecstasy, I'd be dead, because of how it helped me process my PTSD. But we don't hear any of that in the rhetoric, which I'm digressing because that isn't cannabis. But cannabis itself, like now, your question was, do I ever want anything stronger? I currently cannot get high. Do I want to take cocaine? No. Do I want to take MDMA? No. I do take magic mushrooms because they help with my pain and PTSD and anxiety and depression. So I do use psychedelics in that respect. But I don't, because I can't get high anymore, doesn't make me want to go and jack up heroin or something like that.
Fine. And back to that, and are you using any pharmaceutical drugs at this moment of time?
I am prescribed Oromorph, liquid Oromorph solution, which I use intermittently, not very often at all, because it causes me severe abdominal pains, and also it changes my personality. It makes me into this angry, impatient, intolerant person rather than the chilled, placid, friendly guy that I usually am, which cannabis helps.
I've got a question for you, Russ, actually. When you picture this gateway, okay, do you picture that you walk through the gateway, you grab it, put it in your bag, carry on walking? Or do you picture that when you walk through the gateway, you basically leave the previous gateway behind and move on to the next one? Because the whole idea is if cannabis is a gateway, does cannabis then go along with it, or does cannabis just lead you onto other things and you leave cannabis behind? As in, like, how?
I've absolutely no idea.
It's just a question. It's like when someone views the gateway.
I can't answer your question. It just seems very hypothetical, so I can't.
It's just a question.
It will be down to every individual.
I can't answer it.
It will be individual, you see. Some people, like, look at the whole drug use of the whole world, all drugs. According to the World Health Organization, 85% of global drug use is non-problematic. Only about 10 to 15% of all drug use is problematic drug use. So it shows that the vast majority of people don't have this thing of, oh, cannabis doesn't work, so now I need something stronger, something to take me higher. That again it's a prohibitionist construct.
What do you think would happen if they let's use your terminology, it's not mine, if they ease the prohibition, let's say, and change the laws, and just on cannabis made it legal? How would that work? What would the mechanics of that be?
Well, the first thing is you wouldn't have millions of people having their lives destroyed by prosecution. Now, criminalization is extremely harmful to individuals, their families, and communities. That is concrete harms. Cannabis can have potential harms. That is not disputed. So we have the very concrete harms of criminalization versus the very potential harms of cannabis. So in my mind, the first thing that would be achieved, you would have millions of lives spared from the ruination of criminalization. That's the first bonus. The second bonus then is the economy will open up, because we could have a licensed and controlled market rather than what we currently have. Sorry, Ali.
So once again, like, your experiences have formed your opinions, and your experiences have constructed your mindset. I want you to share the story of your brother. We've got like 13 minutes left. Sure. So I want you to share the story of your brother and why you have such a strong belief that the system creates criminals as opposed to the system. Okay, because I feel like your personal experiences, because that's all we have in this world. All of us, is our personal experiences, which forms our opinions of the world. And fact of the matter is why I love this show, because we're getting so many others' personal experiences, and that's what we're forming our education and our opinions on. And that's what this whole industry is all about. So what I'd really like you to do is maybe speak about your brother a little bit, speak about his journey, and speak about why you believe the system fails people.
Sure, and when I began campaigning for medical cannabis, by the way. So just to get that out there, that was what I began campaigning for medicine. And during my journey's time, I've changed it from that to the end of prohibition completely. The reason being, it's not just about sick and dying people who've been denied access to what is humanity's most ancient herbal health remedy and is far safer than most available drugs. Aside from that, you have the fact is young people use drugs even though they're not supposed to. And when they do, they get caught up with the law, and then the law ruins their life. So I mentioned I lived in North Wales. So I'm an English person in North Wales. So was my brother, who was 5 years older than myself. He didn't like alcohol. It made him violent. It made him fight. He also had issues from our childhood. He had a different dad to me, as it happens. He wasn't my biological full brother. He was my half brother. His dad was more violent and things like that. So he had a load of issues in his head. And we lived in North Wales, where we were systemically abused by the locals because of the history between England and Wales. And interestingly, I've actually become an English-Welsh nationalist, as it happens. I'm now like a Welsh nationalist, because I'm on their side, even though I'm English. But that actually the reason that's important is because the police hounded my brother, and they caught him with a piece of hash in his pocket, like a joint, and they took him to court for it. And the judge actually threw it out of court because it was 50 pence worth of hash it was valued at. But because the police then knew my brother used cannabis, they hounded him. And now he wasn't a saint. He did do other things wrong. He got in fights. He did a bit of stealing. So I'm not going to say he was a saint like his namesake. But they pursued him for cannabis, and they finally imprisoned him for cannabis. Before he went into prison, my brother hated heroin. He hated heroin addicts, which I think was wrong, but he really disliked heroin and heroin addicts. And he came out of prison heroin addict, because there are more drugs in prison than there are on the streets. And they use heroin because it's out their system quicker than cannabis. So he told me how he became a heroin addict in there because the cannabis testing is in his system like 28 days, cannabis. Heroin's out after 3 days, I think he told me. So they ended up, it becomes endemic in prisons, heroin issues. So my brother then came out, and he went from being this young man that had all these amazing ideas for business creations, a very entrepreneurial person my brother was. He wanted to get out there, work hard, earn a living, and make something for himself. He came out of prison heroin addict, and then went through the whole spiral of substance misuse. He then got himself off heroin, so he was no longer using it, and he set up a business undersealing caravan. We lived in North Wales, lots of caravan parks, undersealing caravans to protect them from the weather. And he was on a job on a caravan site, and someone was moving some stuff with a mini digger and asked for his assistance, and he got crushed by this mini digger, and it crushed him in the abdomen and caused these most horrific wounds, which then, when they put him in hospital, they put him straight on opiates and benzos. So they've put someone who used to be a heroin addict back onto opiates and benzos. He went through the most awful infections, gangrene. I nursed him through it myself. It was absolutely horrendous. By the time we're talking over a year before his wounds healed. By the time his wounds healed, they then just stopped the drugs, which then left him. Well, they withdrew him. He tried to withdraw, and I remember trying to take him through his diazepam withdrawals, and that's how I learned about how the reductions on withdrawals work. And he couldn't quite. They wanted him off it too fast. In essence, he wanted to just smoke his weed and be left in peace, but they wouldn't let him smoke cannabis. They wanted him in and out of rehab, and he had to be off all substances. If he could have been just left to smoke his weed in peace, I think we'd still have my brother with us today. There was no such thing as medical use of cannabis at this point in time. It had not been acknowledged. It was just another illicit drug. So there was no such thing as medical use of cannabis or medical cannabis. And he ended up in and out of rehab a few times, and then ordering loads of substances off the internet, and was basically just found dead in the bathroom one day in his partner's home. And that was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago now. Unfortunately, he wasn't talking to me then, because the nature of my abuses came out, and all my family have disowned me. So it's all quite sad, really. But over the years, I campaign the way I do because I know 14-year-olds, no 16-year-olds should be hounded by the police for cannabis. If they're caught with cannabis, it should be took off them like alcohol is, and they should be sent home for their mum and dads for a talk and education, not a criminal record. Criminal records ruin lives. Cannabis doesn't ruin lives. That is, again, fact. I'm not saying it doesn't ruin any lives, but
that is a horrible, horrible story. And,
yeah, that's why I campaign.
My commiserations to you, first of all.
Thank
because I don't have brothers or sisters, but losing a brother, even if you were somewhat estranged,
well, it makes the loss greater, actually, because we never got to make peace.
Yes, I was trying to avoid saying that because I don't know you well enough, and this isn't my show. This is Ollie's show.
Say as you wish, for a say as you wish, my friend.
Well, no, the point is, you've gone through a lot of issues, and then that loss, which can never be healed, and you can't now ever say the things that you wanted to say in an ideal world. I
campaign in his honor.
Well, that makes that. To me, that, of course, makes absolute perfect sense. And it's just a horrible tale. horrible
Phil,
on every level. I mean, I have to say, Phil, your entire I've been pretty quiet this evening. Your entire tale is so dark. It is so dark. It's just. But what is lovely, and I don't think you thought I was going to say this, is that you've obviously got two kids who adore you. They're there with you. You know, your son's there with you now, and you have their love and support.
I have three.
And that's oh, you got three kids. Okay, there you go.
Yeah,
just showing off.
And
basically,
the
just showing off. Oh, you've got what? You got a granddaughter now.
Coming soon as well. Yeah,
well,
so that's why suicide. If ever, I'll say this now actually on radio. If ever Phil Monk is dead in his suicide, I've been assassinated, because I won't ever commit suicide because of my children and my granddaughter. So because of the campaigning I do and the conflicted interest I've tried to reveal and the passing of the Covert Human Intelligence Bill, I could now actually be killed off by the government legally because I'm a threat to their business interests, believe it or not. So if ever Phil Monk has committed suicide, I haven't. To clarify,
it's unlikely. I think you're going to.
It is highly unlikely.
Listen, we got the recording.
We got the recording. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's.
No, neither do I.
I hope it doesn't happen. I really hope it doesn't happen. Don't want to lose
when
another.
When you find out Theresa May, Victoria Atkins, you know, when you find out they're all making, like, GW has just sold for £5.5 billion.
No, I know we've covered
our
that 7 weeks ago.
Will have pensions invested in that because that's why they set it up in 1998. So they will have all made a lot of money one way or another. And that, I mean, you don't know the half of the story, Russ. We've had to cram so much in. An hour's never enough.
One thing about Ollie's guests is, like, some of the stuff I totally agree with. Some of the stuff makes me incandescent, but they're always utterly fascinating, always articulate, always intelligent. And it's been 32 extraordinary weeks. You know, I'm really just a passenger in this particular show. I'm just a passenger, and I was delighted to be able to give Ollie, you know, let's see what happens. And it's been extraordinary, and it's even up for an award in America, the show, because people are saying things. You can agree with it, you can not agree with it, but at least there is a forum. And people can say, well, that's just a load of bunk, and what a load of nonsense, the man's an idiot, or that's very interesting. You know, you can't prescribe.
Quickly, before we head off, because I can see the time ticking, for anyone that doubts anything that I've said, everything I've said can be verified on www.wtuhq.org. That's the website for We the Undersigned, www.wtuhq.org. And on there, you've got all of the research we've collected. You've got my personal history. We've got so much stuff on there. And I'm gonna, if you don't mind, gents, I hope you don't mind. The whole story's in here as well.
Go ahead. Let's put it.
Plug yourself, man.
This isn't for me. Every penny from this book will go to the WTU campaign, which we'll talk about more next week. And there's your cliffhanger, gentlemen.
I just want to say one thing. It's very important. It's very important that we know that all of Phil's experiences have formed his opinions, and he's not a man who just woke up one day and thought, screw it, I'm going to go to war with the government. You know, over a lifetime of pain, discomfort, and general emotional empathy, he's kind of reached this point of understanding, and he sees things differently. And it's important to share these ideas, you know, like we were speaking on the phone before, and it's this idea that if an idea is whispered, is it more or less, or is it less powerful than an idea that's screamed about? And if you have a really nice concept that's whispered, is it less nice than a nice concept that's yelled? And the fact of the matter is we live in this world where those who are powerful get the opportunity to scream, and those who are weak have the opportunity to whisper. But the content and the value and the meaning of the words doesn't, like it's not affected by the volume. It's not affected by the sound.
We're nearly out of time here, but I would sort of
thank you, gentlemen.
I just look at Twitter.
How can you disagree with that?
Because look at Twitter, because it's full of people screaming. Phil, it's been a fascinating hour. It really, really has. Thank you so much for joining us. I understand from Ol that you're joining us next week, which will be another adventure all in itself.
We've got a lawyer
much.
next week to make sure Phil doesn't say anything stupid.
No, you won't say anything stupid. It's just
I just mentioned my grow over there, didn't I?
Exactly. I was just thinking, where's the lawyer when we need him? Okay, Jack.
My thanks to Phil Monk. My thanks, as always,
Thank you all for having me.
Ollie Mammon. This has been the ABC of CBD. We will be back, God willing, and all the other powers that are willing, same time next week. Until then, you take care.